The first idea or concept that I want to raise is the erosion of the democratic process, democratic norms. Mr. Wickremesinghe, if I could begin with you. Leaders in 34 countries, 34 countries, tried to revise their term limits, sir, in the last 15 years. And in 31 cases, they succeeded. Who is to be blamed for this erosion of the democratic process? Is it the elected or the electorate?
What is the system? Is it really democratic? If you want to change this, your time period, your term period, and if there is no democracy, it must go through. Therefore, I would reduce the 34 to truly democratic countries. So if you have a democratic system that is functioning, you can some way or you can oppose it. If your system is not democratic, it is like the referenda that is held in North Korea, 99.9 or 102% vote.
But do you agree there's an erosion, sir, of the democratic process, of the norms?
No, there is, if you look at in some of them or some of the safeguards, but on the other hand, the world has opened up.
Let me make it more provocative than David Steward. Is democracy overrated? Some have said that we do not have the imagination to think of a political system that is other than democracy, and we tend to sell democracy and liberal values as not just the best option, but the only option for countries. But this is not 1930, and tanks will not be out in the streets if we do not have a democratic system.
Well, as Winston Churchill said, democracy is the worst system of all political systems except for all the others. And that, I think, is true. People who live in countries that are not democratic will understand the importance of democracy. But in a democracy, power by definition is in the hands of the people. And the quality of the democracy will depend very much on the degree of education, the degree of responsibility and commitment that the people have to the success of the democracy.
He said that electorates can be corrupt as well, and people who vote can be swayed by very personal and very basic motivations. And then the example of China is often given. China is a country that has seen stunning economic rise in the past couple of decades. Its GDP per capita, for instance, has increased 16 times between 1990 and 2017. It has acted against graft, sometimes politically motivated, but it has acted, the government has. And yet China is an authoritarian capitalist state. It is often said in this region, in South Asia, that the China model is the best model. Let's grow economically and then talk about other elitist values. Do you agree with the idea?
Democracy is hard work. It's not easy. It's very easy for countries and people to say, that authoritarian rule is the best, and if you clamp down hard on dissent, that you're going to get a success in economy or things like this. A lot of people do believe in strong rule as well. But if you want a system that is not corrupt, if you want a system that is answerable to the people, if you want a system that is transparent, good governance, then you need democracy.
I also want to bring in the aspect of engaging youth in global governance. And I have numbers again, David Steward. Young people aged 15 to 35 make up 1/3 of the world's population. But the average age of parliamentarians the world over is 53. Why is youth largely absent from decision-making forums?
We have the same problem in South Africa. We have millions and millions of young people who haven't even registered to vote. This is in a country where the vote was so important to bring liberation. It's a problem of education, and it's a problem of whether kids feel that they are involved in the process. It's a problem of seeing whether this democracy actually helps them in practice. So I think it's a problem that has to be addressed by better education, by doing much more by political parties to involve young people, by recruiting more and more young people as voters, by registering them.
You mentioned Greta Thunberg, you mentioned Hong Kong. This has been the theme, the overwhelming theme of 2019 and going into 2020, the protests that we've seen and the young people at the forefront of the protests, even though they may not be participating in the political process, they're making their voices heard on the streets. Do you believe that this protest will continue, and why is it that people feel the need to step out? Do they feel that they're not being heard? Do they feel that they're not being taken as stakeholders? Why do they? What explains this uprising?
I believe that the social media have had a great deal of influence on the various demonstrations that we have been seeing and protests across the world. But the participation of young people in politics and everything else in decision making is part of the democratic process. If in an aging population it would be more natural to have more aged decision makers, but in many parts of the world where the young people are predominant, one would wish to encourage them to enter into politics and various other positions of responsibility as soon as they're able. We are all on a sliding sidewalk of time, slowly drifting into our old age and into our common humanity, so that we should remember that young or old, we should have truly as our priority, if we wish to make the world better, to make it better for everybody, young and old, and regardless of any other distinctions.
Mr. Wickremesinghe, one of the issues that the young people seem to have taken to with a lot of gusto is climate action. They're demanding climate action the world over. In 2019, there were a total of 409 natural disasters, and there was a lot of human cost, but the world also lost a whopping $232 billion. And yet the people who were at the forefront of this, like Greta Thunberg, they saw a lot of support, but they also saw some leaders discrediting them, calling them children. Are the leaders of the world prepared to sit across the table with young people and take their feedback and work with them?
Well, I would say that climate change concerns are not limited to the young people.
Indeed.
All of us are. It has sort of become an issue which has brought young people out there, but it certainly is a concern for everyone. The question is, how do you handle it? Then you come to the actual politics of it. So it finally has become a battle among interested groups and lobbies in any democracy as to how can you bring in the necessary legislation, necessary rules. But there is a good report, I think, when Ban Ki-moon was General Secretary of the UN, he appointed a committee, if I'm not wrong, headed by Kofi Annan, and containing climate change. That's a very good book, that report that's out there. What we can do, it's very, very practical. You can't stop everything. But the question is then leadership, going into the parliament, getting the laws enacted, that's the biggest struggle. Then finding the machinery that is capable of implementing it. Getting a law enacted is insufficient. Have you the machinery to implement it? Have you got a judiciary that can dispose of the case within a few months instead of taking 2 decades? So all those issues have to be sorted out.
The rise of the right has been talked about a lot. And there's an interesting theory that some political experts have put forth. They say that this is not really so much about the support for the right ideology as a protest against the present political establishment.
There's a lot of truth in this. I think that in the European Union, also in the United States, among a section of the population, there is a disaffection with the political class, with bureaucrats who are perceived to have been in power for generations. It doesn't make very much difference whether it's the Republicans or the Democrats or the Tories or Labour, they are the people who call the shots. And a lot of people feel marginalized by this. They feel that they're not being listened to. And I think this is the segment of the population that supports Donald Trump in the United States. It's led to some really negative responses, to breakdown of agencies in Washington which have been doing great work on the environment. It's led to a kind of an anti-intellectual, anti-elite approach. So it is a phenomenon, it is dangerous. I think we're seeing it also, of course, in some European countries in response to perceptions regarding to immigration. Undoubtedly, we're facing new realities, new tensions in Western democracies as a result of this.